Hello, lovely people. It's Huart here. Hope you're doing marvelously well. We're back here with the Little Empire song, Stay New. If you haven't already, please download the files. Last week, we did my drum mix. It was pretty simplistic. It's just a small live drum kit with one kick sample, one snare sample, and like a dance kick added to the choruses, and I believe the bridge. So it's a very simple drum mix. There wasn't a lot of EQ and compression on it. It was pretty straightforward. I left the drums a little bit fatter and a little less scooped and EQ sounding than I would normally, but I think it suited the song. Now we're going to get into mixing the bass, and you're going to hear some subtle things I do to the bass. I do some very, very subtle things, which it seems has confused a couple of people. I use multiband compression where I even out about 250 hertz and below, and it's just about 2 or 3 or 4 dBs worth of compression, and it takes some of that unevenness and just simplifies it. I do that early on in my chain before I apply more aggressive EQ like the R bass, etc., because I like it to hit it more evenly going in. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about high passing, where you need to high pass, where you don't need to high pass, all of the fun things that you do when mixing the bass. So don't forget, download the files and you can mix this song. Also, once you've mixed this song, post it to the Produce Like a Pro Facebook page and be sure to tag the band Little Empire. If you tag them, I'm sure there'll be a link down below where you can find out where to get to their Facebook page, but tag them and I'll get the band to listen and they can comment as well. I love this community. You guys and girls are absolutely amazing. You help each other enormously. It's really wonderful. So thank you ever so much for watching. Let's do a mix of the bass. So here we are with the bass guitar. This is kind of a bratty played bass guitar. I played it. It is not my T40, which I usually play or often play. It's the Mexican jazz bass that I have. And it's played probably too hard because I'm grooving along with the track. So there's times like here, you can see even just from the dynamic. You can hear it's kind of fretting out. It's kind of, what's happening is I'm probably just digging in too hard. And to be honest, you know, I could replay it, but there's something about the energy in this track that I like. This is a common problem or a common reality in recording, is that if this was a band playing live and you just had the bass and the drums locking together and it's fretting out and the bass player's playing too hard or too soft, or both, you know, too hard sometimes and too soft the other, which I think is pretty typical of this performance. But the energy is there and the drums and the bass feel good together, which I think they do, quite frankly. Let's put the drums and bass on together. Slapping, I hear a bit of, but it feels good. So it's not perfectly clean, but this is rock and roll. So we're going to make the best of the situation. So if we just go back to the bass. So, and by all means, you can replay anything. That's the great thing about having these files, is you can do your own production stuff to it. It is actually called Produce Like a Pro. This is all about production stuff. It's not always just about mixing. And very, very often I get stuff to mix and I have to replay things. Or I'm trying to get choruses to sound bigger, so I put rake guitars in and stuff, and I just push them up lightly underneath, or a piano reinforcing chords. You know, all of these kind of things can be done. And, you know, these files are for you to download and for you to do whatever you like with. I mean, mix them, tweak them, remix them, you know, do whatever feels great. But let's have a talk about this bass. So there's quite a lot going on in it. One of the things that was one of the issues was the bass DI. If I go, say, to the chorus, and the bass in general is really, really dynamic on the low end. It just kind of explodes. If we take off all of our EQ and compression, we've got this. I mean, that just, blah. I mean, that is super, super loud. It just blows up. So what did I do? Well, a couple of things. I'm going to take all the stuff off the channel as well. Obviously the first, but you can hear how that blows up. So what did I do? Well, I did a couple of things. On the EQ here, got rid of a little bit of that 150, was really blowing up. Compressed it, subtly. But I'm actually running a limiter across it, because that low note is just... So already a little bit more even. But I've also got an MC2. So what is the MC2 doing, the Mac DSP? It is a multiband compressor. So what you're going to hear here, let's just take it out of bypass. Look what I've done. So I've gone here at 100 and it's pretty even. It's basically, I'm giving it quite a lot of compression. You can see the multiband compressing. See how much it jumps. It jumps by, I mean, nearly another 6 dB of gain reduction at some points when it hits that low note. We'll increase our release time or decrease our release time, make it a little... So it jumps back a little bit more evenly, but you can see there, see what it's doing? It's mainly compressing that low note when it gets really out of control. So, there's a time adjuster on there, by the way, just to knock it back in phase, get the polarity correct between the two signals. Okay, the bass amp. The bass amp, I took out most of the low end on the bass amp because it was doubling up and sounding really thick, but not thick in a good way. So I did just 2 sets of high pass. That's the first one. Put in the bass DI. Then the second one is here. Because even though I'm high passing and, you know, supposedly pulling out a lot, there's still tons of low end going through. So, pretty even now, compared with what we had. Now, if you go to our C4, it's doing even more. I think one of the best and easiest ways to see this would be to look at the VU meter on the desk. Now, if we listen to it, this is with the C4 on. This is the multiband compressor. Have a look at the console VUs. So it's going up about 2 dB when that low note hits. Coming up about 2.5 dB. Now let's take the C4 off. Just farts out totally. We're getting, it's basically bringing us down about 1.5 dB, 2 dB. Not a massive amount. So it's basically giving us about 1 dB, 2 dB's worth of additional gain reduction on those lows. I get a lot of people asking me about why and making comments on it, but you know, I just using it to even that low end. Take it off. Back on. It just evens out that down, 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 boom, down, down, down. That little 1.5 to 2 dB's worth of gain reduction on that super, super low is really nice, and it keeps it very, very even. Okay, I am then doing a little R bass. And that's, I'm using the R bass after doing all of this EQ and multiband. Another thing you can do, and especially on this tone here, would be maybe to use a little bit of saturation. And I'm not afraid to put it kind of a bit everywhere, because that will eat up a little bit of those transients and also give us a little bit, you know, absorb some of this extra issue that we've got. Not that it's bad at the moment, but hey, let's have a little practice with it. So I'm going to go to my harmonic here, and I'm just going to use lo-fi. And I'm going to use it first on the DI. I find the saturation is darker. Here's the distortion. Definitely tougher, more middly. Too much for me, but we can hear what it can do. It's just evening it out just a little bit. Okay, let's try it on the bass amp here. Bypass. So we're getting like 13 dB. I'm going to put some more saturation on. That's definitely more even, although it's increased in volume quite a lot. And I don't mind the drive. I think it's going to give it some more. Now, it's come up. Let's have a look. It's still hitting around about 11 to... Yeah, it's pretty even now. It's evening it out. So if we... Yeah, that's quite a leap. So let's bring this down to about 3 dB. A bit more maybe. So I don't mind that. So it's a little aggressive. I've just gone in there, I've used some multiband, I've used a little bit of distortion. I'm just screwing it up a little bit, and I think it sounds great. I think another thing you could do is just concentrate on using the DI. I do that quite a lot. You know, and there's many, many different things I do. You'll notice with the DI and the bass amp, quite often I will just get rid of all of the low end out of the bass amp entirely and just use the DI, so there's no phase cancellation, so the clarity is really good. I'm almost doing that here. I mean, it's almost gone. There's not much below about 150 there. Here I'm gently rolling off like 164. If I take those EQs off, first of all, it's super loud and it's distorting into the lo-fi, but ultimately the bottom end just gets too stodgy and messy, and it just turns into a low-mid mess. You know, because the super, super lows are starting to cancel each other out because they're not perfectly in phase. The polarity's off. Another thing I'll often do is this. Take one of these elements, like the bass amp. We can do Shift Option D, and you can do this obviously in your session on your own. So take the active playlist, like so, and maybe on this one only, like do something really crazy, like get, you know, get a Sans amp. Let's find our chorus section again. Just up to this part here. mean, that amount of drive makes it very even sounding, but it's... So let's, there's some automation on there. Let's go along, take it out of group, go to the volume trim, bring this down because it didn't come down as much as we wanted it to because of the automation. Let's go to volume trim on this one. I don't know, let's bring it down about here. Let's see what we got. So what we've done is we have just brought those down because there was automation written in, but I use volume trim because when I tried to pull the volume down a second ago, obviously the automation was written in there and it just bounced back up again. So by using volume trim, I'm maintaining my automation that I have. Kind of like that distortion underneath. You can cut me turning to the speakers. So I kind of like that there. By the way, these little Genelecs don't have the biggest bass response, so we'll flick over to the big Genelecs to check all that out. But it's nice to work on the small ones when you're doing detail stuff and keep it at low level listening. Cool. So once more, so what we've done is we just duplicated the bass amp and put distortion on it. You could do that also with, of course, the DI. I just like the DI because it's usually printed cleaner than an amp. So, see, on its own, it's messy and disgusting and filthy. I've got a little boost here at 110. I'm boosting this mid-range at 1.7 here, which kind of gives it some ugliness. Sometimes the bass tone on its own is horrific. Put it in with this. Now it works. Especially because that kick drum, we have that dance kick going on. But have some fun with this one. Have some fun with the bass. I think you can do all kinds of craziness. Like I say, this bass is like bratty and played really aggressively. When I record bass quite often, when I'm not just like working super quick through stuff, I mean, it can be really super compressed and beautiful waveforms that just sound like bomb smoothness. This sounds like me banging the schnizzle out of the bass and sticking, getting really stuck in. And I think that's a big part of a performance. And it's also a big part of being a mixer, of like deciding what are you trying to do? What are you trying to preserve? That's why I think having a little bit of extra distortion here, whether it be the lo-fi or the Sans amp that I'm putting on, adds to that kind of cacophony. A bit more energy even. You lose all that distortion in the track when it's playing. So what I did there as a reminder is I duplicated the amp track, I kept all of the same settings, and then I stuck a Sans amp across it, which is just putting out a ton of hiss and noise. So it sounds fantastic. So, okay, don't be afraid to try, messing up bass tones and stuff. If you want the super, super lows, I usually use the DI personally for the lows. That is because it's normally the cleanest signal path, so it gives me the most purest sounding low end. Now, obviously, if you only have a bass amp, then great, use the bass amp. But bass amps tend to have, there's transformers and, sometimes there's tubes and whatever. There's loads of other things in there, and there's a speaker which may be a little, ratty or whatever. The point is there's things in that bass amp that might be giving you additional distortion or additional coloration, which might be really nice, blended, but isn't going to give you the purest bass tone. That's the great thing about the DI, is normally, not necessarily this one, but normally the bass DI is printed the cleanest of all. This one's bratty and slapped, and the dynamics you can just see are all over the place. And when you listen, you hear the strings hitting the pickup and all this kind of stuff that's kind of messy. But it gave us a challenge, and I think I personally say there's about 3 different ways to mix this and make it sound great. One could be just to take the DI, multiband compress, get the bottom end nice and even, and just use the DI. Then there's a DI amp, and then of course there's a DI and distortion. You could do any of those kind of things. You could take actually the DI and distort it and come up with a completely different bass amp sound altogether. But it's a challenge. I'm sure you guys and girls are willing to accept it. Have a marvelous time working on this song now and trying different techniques out. If you look at all my different mix breakdowns, pretty much every one has different elements of what I'm doing here. Sometimes I use the multiband compression barely at all, and it might just be giving us like half a dB. Sometimes, like here, I'm using a little bit more aggressive. We're looking at 1.5 to 2 dB. There's lots of different things. I think the main one that we're doing here is we're using the multiband on the bass DI, which is really controlling that 100-ish range where that one note was going really crazy. And we're getting like 3 dB of gain reduction just on that low note. So that's a really useful thing. So it's all about horses for courses, like what works. There's no one way to do it at all. And if anybody tells you you're doing it wrong, if it sounds good, then it sounds good. There's lots of different ways to do this. And it is something that sorts out the men from the boys quite often, low end in general in mixes. Most of the biggest faults I hear in mixes is the low end, is the lack of super lows on the kick and definition between the kick and the bass. This song, I believe that we really went stodgy on the low end on purpose. If you go back to the drum mix that I did, you'll find out I didn't pull out that much in the way of low mids as I normally would. In my other mixes, I pull out tons more 350 than I did in this. However, I kind of wanted this to just be like big and stodgy, and I think we did it. And this is mixed not using any console EQ or compression at all. Totally in the box. All right. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. I'll see you again next time for guitars. And we're going to listen to the drums, the bass, and the guitars together. Please download the files here if you haven't already got them. Mess around with it. Let's get this song sounding amazing. And of course, post your mixes to the Produce Like a Pro Facebook page. And if you can, remember to tag Little Empire, and I'll make sure that they listen to the mixes and comment. So thank you ever so much for watching. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.